Welcome back to the show. My name is John Knocklinger. I'm the men's divorce coach and mentor. You can join our free men's divorce support community at mensdivorcenetwork.com. Today, my guest is Kenneth Harrell. He's a personal injury attorney in New Jersey and the owner of the Harrell Law Firm. However, he isn't here today to talk to us about personal injury actions, although I'm sure we would get a great education about it. He's a survivor of divorce. We're going to talk about why he got divorced, his experience in the legal system, which he has a unique experience since he is an attorney, so he can talk to us a little bit about the difference that he's noticed in the divorce legal system, his advice for men going through divorce, and of course, his post-divorce life, so he can share with all of you that it's not all doom and gloom. It can get better. Thanks for being here today, Ken.
Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. So I guess let's sort of start back where I guess this conversation starts, which is, when did you get divorced and what led you to that point?
Sure. I separated from my ex-wife in March of 2018, and we began the process. The process took a long time. I mean, I think the divorce was finalized in June of 2019. So I've now been divorced for over 3 years. And yeah.
All right. So before the process started in 2018, had there been a period of time that divorce had sort of been on the horizon, or was it sudden?
I got married very young, and it had been a thought many times, but I always tried to work it out. I always tried to stay. It was kind of in my DNA. I mean, like you, I'm from the South, and going through a divorce is not an easy thing when your entire family is remain married there for many years. But it came to a head over the year before, 2017 to 2018. There was a lot of tension and just a lot of issues. And, it really became clear, I would say, towards the end of 2017 that this was coming. I guess in answer to your question, yeah, it had been on the horizon for quite some time.
Who decided that it was time to get divorced, or was it a mutual decision?
I think it was my decision disguised as a mutual decision. When the actual conversation happened, it was her saying that this is coming about, but it was, if I'm honest with myself, it was me searching for the right time and the right place to say it. So while you could kind of say it was mutual, I believe I was kind of the driving force behind it, realizing that this just really was not working. So.
Well, that's good. I mean, did you have any help to get to that realization? What I mean by that is, were you in therapy? Did you talk to anybody, or was this just self-reflection and you finally just decided it was time?
Sure. So I was in therapy myself, and I found that to be extraordinarily helpful at getting a perspective on my tendencies and my position in the relationship and battling the things that my insecurities and things that I had an issue with. We also tried couples counseling in a couple of times. It was never very productive because I felt that I was trying, I was giving everything I could. I felt that my ex-wife was not, and was kind of deflecting and placing all the blame on me. So I had to deal with it both in couples therapy, and then that deflection in couples therapy was extended to personal therapy, where I would deal with those issues as well.
Yeah. How long before the divorce were you in couples therapy?
I think the first time was about 5 years before, and then there was one more group of meetings that just really it didn't take. Just didn't. If we went a couple of times, a handful of times, the second time that would be a lot. The first time was a little more intense, and
after that, did it seem like it got better? I mean, did some of the issues you guys were working through, did they improve after couples therapy?
In the short term, yes. But I think you have to have two people that are really committed to making change. And while I was in therapy for myself, my former wife would not really go into therapy and deal with her issues. I encouraged her to do so, and she never would. So even if we would see some gains through couples therapy and post couples therapy, the relationship regressed back to where it was, just because that was the way it had always been. So,
whose idea was it to go to couples therapy? 5 years before you got married.
It's 5 years before we got divorced, and it was we probably should have gone 5 years.
Probably should have gone that 5 years before you were divorced. So whose idea was it?
It was a mutual. It was a mutual decision. I was just not happy, and it was very clear that I was not happy. I remember having to sit down in our living room and having a big talk about, what are we going to do about this? And I think that may have been the first time that divorce was even discussed, but we decided to give it a shot and to go to couples counseling mutually at that time.
Now, do you think, looking back on it, that you really wanted to save your marriage, or do you think this was a little bit more of your Southern roots kicking in, that you just felt like you had to do everything possible to try to salvage it, but did you feel like your body was just telling you, I really am not ever going to find happiness here. I really need to move on?
So I'm just going to give a little context, if I could, just to kind of explain my answer to that question. I was 24 when I got married. She was a teenage mom and had a teenage son. He was 6 years old when we got married. I adopted him and raised him as my own. So a lot of my wanting to save the marriage revolved around my son, and making sure that he had a stable home life. And I think that, in combination with the Southern upbringing, would be the reason behind it, only because I just don't feel that my ex-wife was ever honest with herself about our relationship and about her feelings about me. And while I just don't think that was anything that could have ever been overcome. So the reason, I guess, because of that personality situation with my ex-wife, I don't think we ever could have worked it out, regardless of how much therapy we went to, until she dealt with that issue with her. I worked very hard on my issues, and I needed a partner who would work very hard on their issues in order for the marriage to work, and I just did not have that partner.
Well, we see both of those things come up all the time. One is someone works on themselves and the other one doesn't, and so you grow apart because one person's growing and one person's not. I mean, you're basically dying. One person's growing, one person's dying. The other thing is staying married for kids. That happens very frequently. People are very concerned about what a divorce is going to do to that relationship, and how it's going to disturb the family dynamics. I mean, people will frequently wait until the kids are in college to get divorced, for example. So they feel like, okay, now it's okay. I don't have to deal with custody plans. I don't have to deal with any of that stuff because the kids are in college. So neither one of those things is terribly unusual. That happens quite frequently. But I'm glad to hear, I mean, you guys tried. You tried to work it out, and it didn't work out. So you're to the divorce now, 2018. What was when you decided, okay, it's time to go, it's time to get divorced, what was your first thing that you did? Did you reach out to an attorney? Did you reach out to your therapist? Who did you reach out to and say, okay, this is starting, so you could start to put your mind around what your next step was going to be?
Sure. Even before 2018, I don't know if your audience knows, you and I went to law school together. So I knew that you had gone and been successful doing divorce work. So I reached out to you to kind of get an idea of what things would look like if indeed we made that decision. And then after the decision was made, I again reached out to you and discussed everything with you. And so that was kind of my first step.
So, I mean, reaching out to, as we know, because we discussed it, you are a business owner, you've got a law firm, and it's really important even if you don't have a business, if you just have a lot of assets or even don't have a lot of assets, reaching out to somebody just to get a sense of what you're looking at is always a good idea. What I fear sometimes is that people will reach out to an attorney and they'll find out what they're looking at and it will deter them from getting divorced. And those are the people I just want to figuratively kind of smack across the face and say, listen, you've called a divorce attorney. Clearly you've decided it's time. It's time to get divorced. And you're letting yourself be scared about, what may or may not happen in your divorce. And, you found out what you were looking at in terms of what the divorce was going to look like. But it seems like at that point, you'd already decided I'm getting divorced. Regardless of how much money has to be paid, it doesn't matter. I have to get divorced and I just need to try to mitigate those, I guess, damages. So I guess a good question for you is, when you started finding out what it was going to look like, was there ever a moment where you're like, ugh, maybe I should try to work on the marriage a little bit more, or were you like full steam ahead no matter what happens?
I can understand where some people would be, oh my gosh, it's going to cost a lot. Oh my gosh, this is going to be, this is going to be prohibitive. I don't want to go through this. I don't want my business looked at. I understand where people could come from and think that. But at that point in my marriage, the counseling and all the things that we did, I was done. I was full steam ahead at that point. I hoped that it would not drag out a year and a half. I had hoped that it would be something where cooler heads could prevail and sit down and come to an agreement. And in fact, you and I tried that. But unfortunately, it just wasn't in the cards for me. So
what do you think, looking back at it, what do you think was the issue, primary issue of why things dragged out? Obviously people, someone wants $5, the other one wants $10. Okay. So, even in your line of work and personal injury actions, that's, you negotiate, you try to figure out a middle ground. But you're dealing with people's lives. It's a little bit different in this context. But what do you think was the driver? Because what I say all the time, Ken, is that 95% of divorce is emotion. It's 95% emotion. So looking back at it, can you pinpoint, do you think there's something that was going on either in front of everyone's face or behind the scenes that really was the driver of why it took so long to get your ex-wife to a point where she would agree to something that was reasonable?
The funny part is, I believe, if I recall correctly, I believe I had my accountant review both my firm and I have another business as well, and I told him, I don't want you to fudge any numbers. I don't want anything. I just want the numbers because I want this over with and I want to try to get it settled. And we did that. You and I provided that report to my ex-wife and her attorney. And there was this belief that that I was hiding assets and things of that nature. And so they wanted to hire a separate accountant to review everything. When they hired that separate accountant, the numbers actually came back more in my favor than my accountant had put the numbers. So your question was what underlying, what reason was there not to act in good faith and negotiate in good faith? And my instinct is that's just, I mentioned personality stuff that my ex refused to deal with. And I think a lot of it had to do with that. I think a lot of it had to do with wanting to win and not wanting to be in second place, where I kind of wanted both of us to walk out of it okay and to move on, understanding that I was not going to be in as good a financial position as I was before, but realizing that the relationship had run its course and wanting to try to exit equitably and make sure that I took care of her. I felt obligated to do that. I feel on the other side, there was this feeling of wanting to win and wanting to get as much as possible. And it just wasn't, I did not see the good faith, and now that may be colored by my perception, and I readily acknowledge that. But it's if I had to say the reason behind it, I believe it was my ex-wife's desire to just to win the divorce. Unfortunately.
Well, that's not uncommon. It's not uncommon at all. And what's always interesting, though, is, you indicated that both of you sort of reached a mutual decision to get divorced. Mm-hmm. So more times than not, when that's how it starts, people tend to find a way to be more amicable. But it sounds like there was a very large mistrust of you behind the scenes, which that happens a lot in divorce too. And for whatever reason, whether they're legitimate reasons or not legitimate reasons, I mean, she had some reason not to trust you. But at the end of the day, another issue that rises that wasn't in part of your description, but I think I'm going to bring it up, and it probably will be added, is, sometimes who the attorneys are it doesn't help the situation. For example, if she had gotten an attorney that she had a good relationship with, and that attorney had looked at the documents that your accountant had prepared and said, well, based on my experience, these look fairly good, but you can spend a ton of money and it could be worse off for you, which is what ended up happening. But, we don't know what advice she was really getting. And that's always a problem. And that's why I always tell people when they call me, here's a list of 20 attorneys that you can get your spouse that I can tell you will at least be much more of the alternative dispute resolution mindset. And for those of you that don't know, that means things like mediation, arbitration, means things like just sitting around a table with four people, husband, wife, and two attorneys, and just trying to work it out. But, there are attorneys out there. There's attorneys in your field too, Ken. There's attorneys out there that they're just as much wanting to win as the clients do. So sometimes, to your point about your ex-wife, sometimes if she wanted to win, if her attorney also wanted to win, you combine those two things together, and it can be more of a dangerous situation. Did you ever get the sense that her attorney was feeding this fire that she had to maybe be a little bit more on the I want to win side, versus it was just your ex-wife that was really driving it, and maybe the attorney was trying to pull her away from that?
Sure. I thought, based on some correspondence initially, that it was being driven by the attorney kind of feeding the fire. I asked around about the other attorney, who obviously I'm not going to name here, and there were nothing but nice things said about the attorney. And the one thing that I heard is that she typically is very nice and kind with the client and tries to bring the client along gently. It's just not that was not going to work with my ex-wife. She needed someone to really basically sit her down with the reports and say, you're not going to get better than this. This is pretty good. And we need to talk, because you're going to spend way more money than you can potentially gain. And you may even get less if you proceed down this path. And I'm not sure that the conversation was ever held forcefully enough. So and that's a long-winded answer to, I think it was my ex-wife driving the bus. And that's never a good thing in a divorce. You kind of want the attorney to step in and be the rational thought process. I needed my attorney to step in and be the rational person in the situation, because it is emotional. It's a very difficult thing to get around. This is someone that you swore vows to, that you swore you were going to be with forever, and you're not. And it can be a very emotionally tolling situation. So you need an attorney who is going to be real with you and be honest with you. Or so if you can sit down at a table with your spouse, have an attorney that's a neutral party and try to come to terms and determine what works best in your particular scenario. So.
No, absolutely. I mean, sitting down with a mediator right off the bat is a great opportunity for most people that are going through a divorce. And And I think your other point was really good too, Ken. And I mean, this happens really regardless of whether you're meeting with an attorney or a financial planner or anybody else in the world. Just have your antennas up. If they're just yesing you to death, and they're telling you, oh yeah, we can get you that, we can get you that, oh yeah, 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 and it's all yes, 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 and you don't hear any downside. You don't hear any potential places where you might not do as well as you want. They are not the right person for you. I don't really care who they are. There's always going to be something that you need to nuance or something you need to handicap when a professional is giving advice. And I see a lot of attorneys out there who will, someone goes in and they're like, oh, you're absolutely going to get alimony. You're absolutely going to get, half of this. You're absolutely going to get 100% of that. You're going to get this. We're going to get you full custody of your kids, whatever it is. And they never tell their client those are like pie in the sky, best case scenarios, but not likely scenarios. And so what ends up happening is if that's what someone's told, then they're less willing to compromise because they've already been told that there's a better thing out there. There's a better settlement that might happen. And so I do think, you really appreciate it as an attorney. Like, don't bullshit me. Just tell me what it is. Like, what's likely to happen here? Yes, you're going to try to make arguments to get me the best situation possible. What's likely to happen? And I feel like a lot of people that start divorce really need to ask that question. Like, okay, you can tell me what you're going to try to get me, but at the end of the day, when the dust clears, what is it that's most likely to happen? Because then I have to decide, is it worth spending all this money to try to get this better result? Or can I spend less money and get this other result that maybe I can live with? Did you ever encounter that kind of thought process? Did you at the beginning of your divorce?
So it's funny, there's not a ton of overlap between personal injury and divorce and family law, but there is this one overlap. And we have clients, and clients are people. They're human beings. They have interest. They have desires. And you, as an attorney, in my opinion, you have an ethical obligation to make sure that you are real with your client, that you explain to your client the pluses, the minuses, the benefits, the costs, the potential to be successful, the potential to lose. And I do that every day. I get asked every day, what is my case worth? What is my case worth? And there is a ton of nuance in that conversation. And the fact of the matter is, your case is worth what a jury will award or what you will accept from the defendant in settlement, what the defendant's willing to pay. And really, I can ballpark those numbers, but I can't give exacts. And I understood from the beginning when we started the divorce that I wasn't going to have exact numbers. And all I was looking for was a range, an understanding of where are we kind of looking. And there were points during a year and a half going through this where I lost sight of that range. And I just would get caught up in the minutia of the fight of everything. But what I would advise your listeners to do is to write down exactly, from the beginning, write down what are our goals here, and understanding it's not an exact science. What are our goals? And don't lose sight of those goals from all the emotional stuff, and understand that there's a ton of nuance. But at the end of the day, the ranges that I received at the beginning we ended up right in the middle of those ranges in the end. And there may have been, a couple things here that I didn't want to give on, but it just made more sense in the end to give on, that we ended up basically where it was projected. And so for your listeners, don't lose sight of that, because it gets very emotional.
Yeah. And I think that once the divorce process gets in a prolonged period and you start spending a lot of money, you start to get more resistant to wanting to get closer to maybe the middle of a range or even less than you wanted, because now you think about it, well, I spent all this money and now I really need to get something for all of that, which is all the more reason why settling at the very beginning before someone spends all this money is so powerful, because you don't have that drive. Because I hear that all the time. As attorneys, we hear things like, I've spent all this money, I've gotten nothing, which I always I always snicker when I hear that, because I always think to myself, like, well, you're going through a divorce. What is the result? The result is you're going to be divorced.
Yeah.
And we're going to split your assets and maybe income, depending on what the circumstances are.
Mhm.
That's the result. So, the interim result is just people see all this money going out, and they're like, but I'm not getting what I want. And they get frustrated. I mean, you are a little bit, you have a different situation with your clients, because a lot of them aren't really paying you anything. You're waiting till the end to, the settlement is where you get paid. But
Mhm.
it's really, the process, and the longer things drag out, the more frustrated people get. I think that's with anything in life. The more frustrated people get, and it happens on both sides. So, I mean, I think I loved your advice, and I really just want to reiterate what you said earlier. If you can sit down with a mediator without attorneys involved at the very beginning, you don't have to resolve everything. I mean, people think this is an all or nothing game. Maybe you can resolve most of your things. If you have kids, try to sit down and resolve custody, maybe. Or, if you have a house, you can resolve what you're going to do with your house. You can resolve certain things, and maybe just leave, one or two issues for the attorneys, as opposed to trying to deal with everything and getting caught up on this. But I would say a year and a half is a long divorce. But thanks to our lovely new world that we're living in now, year and a half, 2 years is pretty common if you don't get your case resolved pretty quickly, which I know is horrifying for you, that you could have been going on for 2.5 or 3 years. I mean, can you imagine?
No, no. It was that year and a half was very difficult, but in the end, the result was what I needed. And it's frustrating that it couldn't get resolved in the beginning. And again, I would think that there are plenty of couples out there that would be able to resolve in the beginning. It just so happened that my situation was not conducive to that, even though we tried. So, and by we, I mean my side, me, my attorneys. It was all an effort to be very forthcoming and very transparent, and to try to resolve as soon as possible. So,
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would say, in my other hat, I mediate a lot of cases, and most people, when they come into this, they've heard the horror stories from their friends and family about how much divorce costs. A lot of people come in maybe not happy with each other, but they come in with this thought process, which is what you said yours was at the beginning, which is, listen, this should be fair for both of us. It should be. I mean, if someone's getting off with a really great deal, I mean, it's probably going to be something that's difficult to sell to the other person. So if you can sit down right at the beginning, that's great. Now, unfortunately, it didn't happen with you. It doesn't happen with everybody, but that should be the first thing you should try. So anyway, you went through the divorce process. So just a couple words. I want to hear about your experience with the judicial system itself, because after a year and a half, you did have to go through a little bit within the courthouse and have some exposure to judges. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about what that was like, and was it what you expected? Was it something different? And how does that color your attitude towards divorce going forward?
Sure. I found my divorce was in Middlesex County. I found the bench in Middlesex County, at least my exposure to the bench, I found the judge to be very thorough. I found that he reviewed that we were in on a motion. We didn't end up trying the divorce, but we did have some motion practice. And I felt that the judge was very prepared, knew the issues for the motion, really cut to the chase, did not allow either side. And we didn't really try. It was kind of the other side to push issues that were irrelevant to the issues before the court. And, I thought, in my opinion, as far as the judicial system is, I thought it was fair and ended up, about where we expected. So we thought it was fair, but it's something, if I could have avoided by mediating, I would have loved to have avoided, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. It makes a lot of sense. And for listeners who aren't familiar with what a motion is, and they call it something different in every state, but this is where you're just asking a court to do something before the trial. So, and even at the trial, asking the court to make a decision on something. So a lot of times in divorce, you'll go in and ask a judge for, temporary support, temporary custody. You might ask a judge to get involved in an accountant, like you were talking about what happened in your divorce, Ken. You might ask a judge to do something, and they're not supposed to do anything unless you filed something formal with them and asked them to make a decision. Although in divorce, judges tend to make little decisions off the cuff all the time, and that's one of the dangers of going into the court system. I mean, you go in, and all of a sudden, you get a judge making a ruling. Like in your case, if a judge had made a ruling in this motion that had been very favorable, extremely favorable to your ex-wife, it might have empowered her to be more difficult. And it's just dangerous to get a judge involved at all for both sides.
So I did say, in this particular case with this particular judge, I was impressed with the even-handedness. I will say that, like you just said, I have heard horror stories. At least in New Jersey, as you and I both know, judges are placed on the bench. They're not always placed in the area where they practice. You have people who do what I do, sometimes sitting on the bench deciding divorces. And that's a huge risk, because you have somebody who doesn't necessarily know the intricacies and the very main issues that need to be decided. Or maybe they know the main issues, but they don't know the little issues. And if they're making decisions off the cuff, that becomes very hard to appeal those issues. It becomes very hard. It can create a mess. And so, like I said, when I was talking, I was lucky. I had a good judge, but not everybody's going to be that lucky. And going to mediation or even arbitration is probably, you have more control over the situation than if you allow it to be in the court system.
Sure, and those things are a lot quicker too, for the most part, in the court system. So you get divorced, sign the document, the judge says you're divorced. Was that the end of the legal process, or did you have anything that happened after that?
Well, I mean, nothing in the court system. There've been, I'm still paying alimony based on the terms of the divorce, so there's still that pending out there. But for the most part, it's pretty much over. There's just the terms of the agreement that have to be followed until the alimony exhaust. In my case, that'll be in 2027, I believe.
Oh, come on, Ken. You've got a calendar with the dates circled. Come on.
I just don't have it in front of me. That's
you got an alert on your phone.
Yeah, the alert.
That night there's going to be some celebrating.
I have a countdown on my phone.
All right. So you're divorced. You haven't had to go back in the court system. So a lot of people, when they start this process, one of the things that they're scared of is what's going to happen after. Maybe you've been married for a long time. You're used to being in this house, even if it's not great. You're used to being in this house. You have this lifestyle that's been going on. But now you're divorced and you've moved on in your life. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how life is now? Is it what you expected it to be? Is there any surprises? And I'm assuming the answer to this is going to be yes. Are you a lot happier now than you were before you got divorced?
So obviously the answer to that question is absolutely yes. I'm much happier. In my situation, we sold the marital home. It's a little complicated, so I need to get into the details. But my ex-wife bought a townhouse immediately. I wanted to give it a little time to figure out where I wanted to be. So I bought a home in 2020. I am in a relationship, very happy in a relationship. And I have to say, it to me, I wish, at the point that I first realized that this was inevitable, that I had acted at that time, because that timeline would have been sped up, and that timeline would have been, that period of happiness would have been sooner. But I have to say, I have no regrets. I'm very happy having finally made the decision and moved on. And I'm very happy where I am right now.
So do we have anyone special in our life since we got divorced?
Sure. There is a significant other. And we've been together for a few years now. And it's a completely different situation. And I don't wish harm or hold grudges or anything like that. I wish all the best. And I hope my ex certainly finds someone or has found someone that makes her equally as happy as my significant other makes me.
Well, that's nice. So your new relationship, I mean, I know you talked to us already about going through therapy and working on yourself.
Sure.
Do you feel like all of that work you've done on yourself, has it allowed you to enter into this new relationship sort of with a different point of view or mindset than you had during your marriage? I guess another way of asking the same question is, do you think you've figured out a way to sort of avoid maybe some of the things that happened in your marriage that led to getting a divorce in the first place?
Short answer, absolutely. I have. No way would I suggest I'm perfect. There are still some tendencies in my own personality, some places that I go and thoughts and things like that where it takes some time to get out of it. And we all have that. And we all, what is life other than working on ourselves and learning who we are and figuring out who we are? But the work I've done in therapy, I recommend to anyone who will listen. I always think it's a great idea to have a professional, someone outside to talk to work through those issues. And I have, and the relationship itself is night and day compared to my marriage.
And your significant other, does she have children? What is going on?
Sure. She has 3 children. One just went off to college, and one is in 10th grade, the other's in 8th grade. So 2 girls, 1 boy.
So I'm assuming, but based on that, we can assume that she was divorced. So how is it dealing with, dealing with that side of it as your significant other having children with somebody else? Has that been a challenge? Has that been easy? Like because being a step parent to children where there's another parent out there can be tricky. It really can be tricky for a lot of people. So what's been your experience being the step parent?
Mm-hmm. It can be very tricky. And there are going to be times where it's difficult. But what I said at the very beginning of my relationship with Lee is that, I'm here to do right by Lee and to be kind to the children. And if you do that, the rest is going to take care of itself. It doesn't mean you're not going to have tough days, doesn't mean it's going to be difficult, but it's not going to be difficult. But if you follow those 2 things, I mean, in my mind, that's the best advice I can give.
Do you have a good relationship with the kids?
Yeah, all 3. I have I would say very good relationship with all 3. I mean, each is different. And by the way, never stated this to the kids, but, my desire is not in any way to come in and replace their father or do anything of that nature. That's their father. And I wish, and I hope that their relationship with their father always remains strong. And it's very strong in this particular situation. And I want to encourage that and let that be and stay out of the way of anything, in that regard. Like I said, it's simply to do right by Lee and to be kind to the kids. So.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, again, you've given a lot of great advice today. You've sort of had a divorce that was a little bit more complicated than others, and yours didn't have anything to do with kids. Because a lot of times we hear guys come on and there's lots of fights about kids.
Yeah.
Yours was much more about money.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless, at the end of the day, you got divorced. You're doing better now. The light at the end of the tunnel was much brighter and much warmer than it was going in.
Absolutely.
So it's really good. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. And I hope that this conversation helps men move forward.
Great. Thank you for having me.